Hey, everybody.
Can't take this guy anywhere. This is Mike Rafi. Our next speaker, the founder of the Rafi Law Firm. Mike's firm handles personal injury cases, including negligent security, which he's received multiple multi-million-dollar results. Mike's someone who's pretty straightforward and not afraid to tell it how it is, which is something that I've always personally appreciated when I've always reached out to Mike for both personal and professional advice. And, you know, Mike, I don't mean to embarrass you real quick, but so Mike had recently spoken at our GTLA convention. And after Mike had spoken, I had like 3 or 4 people at the table around me just being like, oh my God, I love listening to Mike Rafi speak. And I had like that moment of like pat on the back where I was like, I got that guy.
They've just never heard my nonsense before. That's why they've never heard my nonsense.
But Mike, definitely looking forward to it. And the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, Matt Worthington already won Best Speaker of the Day award since he's 4 minutes early, which never happens in these things. If y'all don't know me, my name is Mike Rafi. I have a law firm here in Atlanta, and we do a good amount of negligent security cases, which is what Mike Roth asked me to talk to you about. Before I begin, I'm going to give you 2 warnings. 1, I have a 4-month-old puppy. So if I start looking around, that's why. He's probably eating something. And if I start yelling at someone, it's not you guys. The second thing is that I'm going to walk you through the basics and literally what we do in my office. For some of y'all, and I was looking at the names on here, some of y'all know this stuff. For you, I hope that I can tell you one thing that you take away that helps your practice. For the folks who don't know about these cases, or maybe have a little bit of experience, but not personally, for you, this is really what this is for. I hope to be able to walk you through step by step what we do, why we do it, and how we're successful at it. It's funny to listen to Matt talk about private investigators. A lot depends on your case type, but in my case type, in this case type, negligent security cases, I can count the number of times I've hired an investigator, and it's probably less than 5 times. And the reason for that, and the reason I'm wearing this right now, is because this afternoon I'm heading out to an apartment complex to go walk around and knock on doors because we think that makes a huge difference. But I'll talk about that just in a minute. I guess I say all that because I want y'all to have good expectations for what hopefully I'll be able to share with you. And second, there is no right or wrong way to do this. There's lots of people out there that handle these cases that do certain things differently than I do, or vice versa. And what works for me, I hope will work for you. But if it doesn't, that's okay. And don't be freaked out if I say something and you go, no, I want to do it this other way. Do it your way. And if it works, that's awesome. If it doesn't, try my way. So let me back up and talk to you about the idea of a negligent security case, because while basic, I think it's really important to understand what the reason is that these are valid lawsuits. So when you go to a business, any kind of business, your expectation is, I think, that we are generally going to be safe. If I go to, Publix down the street, I expect that it's going to be safe. It's going to be safe from slip and fall hazards. It's going to be safe from employees who want to hurt me. It's going to be safe from third-party crime to the extent it can be. The obligation on landlords or property owners or property occupiers is that they need to do one of two things. They need to, 1, they can tell you about the crime or the dangers that are going on. So if you have an apartment complex where there's all these shootings, the apartment complex does not, and I'm going to repeat this, the apartment complex does not have to have police, security, gates, video, signs. They don't have to do anything. The only thing they have to do is tell everybody who's a tenant there, hey, here's what's going on. That's all they have to do. They have to say, hey, you people in buildings A through J, we put a notice on your door, and that notice says, be careful. There's been 5 shootings. Here's the date. Here's the time. Here's what we know about. Be careful. That's it. Why don't apartment complexes or businesses do that though? And the reason's probably obvious. It's because If they did that, people would move out. If they did that, people wouldn't move in. Imagine walking around an apartment complex and you go to tour a model unit. And when you go into the hallway, you see all these signs on doors and they all say, hey, be really careful. There was 5 freaking shootings last night. You're not moving there. So the other option then, if they're not going to put you on notice, if they're not going to give you the same information that they have, so that way you can make a reasonable, informed choice about whether you want to be there, how you want to protect yourself, or so on. If they don't do that, then they need to take reasonable security measures to protect you from dangers that you don't know about. And that's the key, dangers that you don't know about. Let's start with the first half of that sentence, though. They have to take reasonable security measures. What are reasonable security measures? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think anybody does. There's experts out there that are, negligent security experts. They don't know either. Nobody knows, I promise you. What matters is what the 12 jurors will ultimately think is reasonable. I don't know the verb there. And that depends a lot on the situation. It's the classic lawyer answer. It depends. If you are in an apartment complex, or if you own an apartment complex and you only have 10 units, let's call that a small apartment building. Compare that to, I don't know, Post-Chastain with, hundreds of apartments. That is a different situation because they have Post-Chastain, for example, is going to have different means, different ability, different money, more money to protect people. As opposed to somebody who's only got 10 units and is barely making a profit, they're going to have different setups. So the reasonableness of the security measures really depends on the threats, which we'll talk about, and the ability for the apartment complex to make changes that can help people. The second part of that statement was dangers that are only known to the apartment complex, dangers you don't know about. If I go to an apartment complex or a store or wherever, I go to a gas station, and I know that there's been 4 shootings there in the last 4 days. Well, I'm making a decision based on the same information that the gas station has. And therefore, in that situation, it's going to be really tough for me to recover by blaming the gas station. Now, of course, if the gas station had said to me, hey, we know about these 4 shootings, but we've done these things, it's not going to happen again, maybe that helps. But if I have the same information, same information as the property owner or occupier, I have a really tough case. It's kind of like a products liability case. The idea is hidden dangers for the most part. And if the danger isn't hidden, if I know about the danger, I'm going to have a really tough time recovering. So the recap of that first part is, in these cases, you need to be able to show that that the apartment complex had these dangers, and we're going to call them prior crimes. So they had prior crimes, and the tenants, your client, guest, tenant, business invitee, whoever, didn't know about those things and couldn't make a decision because he didn't know. So then you rely on the apartment complex, hotel, whoever, to make reasonable security decisions. So you get a case. Somebody calls you up and says, hey, I was shot at an apartment complex and I think I may need some help because, typically what you hear is there were no cameras, the gate didn't work, and there was no security guard. The first thing that you want to figure out is how bad are the damages. I'm going to be really real and upfront with you guys. It is really difficult to take one of these cases without a significant injury. So put aside all the tough stuff about whether there's liability, negligence, security, prior crimes, put that all aside. When you do a negligent security intake, start with the damages. Just like a products case, it's just like a med mal case, start with the damages. And the reason for that is these cases are extremely time consuming. They are can be extremely expensive. And you have apportionment problems, which I'll mention to you at the end. So you start with damages. The rule in my office, I'll tell you, is 6 figures in medical bills, broken bone of some sort, permanent injury, shot multiple times. I want one or some combination of those things because I need I need that leverage on the damages side in order to bring this case, in order to feel confident, in order to at least have a chance to get a number that's going to make it worth the investment from my firm. So start with damages. That's probably my biggest recommendation here, because you might spend 40 minutes on the phone hearing all about how terrible this apartment complex is, how there's no this, no that, and so on. But when you find out it's a through and through bullet, which I've never been shot before, I don't know who here has. I'm not discounting a through and through bullet. I certainly don't freaking want that. No way, don't shoot me. But if you get shot through your arm and it doesn't hit anything, and you go to the hospital and you're out in 3 hours, you don't have a case. You don't have a case. So start with damages. I can't overemphasize that enough. Start with damages. All right, let's talk about the liability side. That person, that PC, that potential client is going to call you up and they're going to tell you all about their injuries because you're going to ask them about it. And then they're going to tell you all about what they know about the apartment complex. Generally, there's going to be two roads. Either the person's going to say, yeah, I've lived there for a really long time. Let me tell you all about this shit that's been going on. And you're going to be like, whoa. And then you run into that problem of how much do you know? If you know all this stuff, what the heck? Why are you there? So that's one road. And I'm not saying that can't be overcome, but that's one road. The other road is, I don't know, I've never been there before. I was just visiting my friend, gunfire started and I got shot. Either way, you're going to need to validate what you're told or go discover what you're not told. Step one is going to be getting information. Matt Weatherington's one of the best people I know in terms of getting information about anything. So, and you need to channel your inner Matt Weatherington when you start these cases and get some phenomenal information. And the way you do that is a couple different ways. First, you're going to reach out to the police department and you're going to ask for what's called a crime grid. Unless you're in DeKalb County, then they call it a crime stat. I'm going to use crime grid and crime stat differently. To me, a crime grid is you give a specific location, an address to a police force, and you ask for a crime printout of every crime that's ever been reported there over a certain amount of time. I like to go back 5 years, at least from the start. The crime grid, sometimes, especially if it's the city of Atlanta, will take a very long time for you to get. So you can't necessarily just wait on the crime grid. A crime stat, except if you're in DeKalb County, a crime stat is really a radius. You give a specific address and you ask for all the crime that's happened within a mile of that. I don't get that to begin with because I'm not going to read and look through a mile worth of crime. I want to know what's specifically going on, and I'm going to use apartment complex as my example throughout this from now on. I want to know exactly what's going on in the apartment complex. You know, if there's crime at the QT down the street, that could be helpful, but that's not going to be what I base my decision on to take the case or not. So I keep it pretty tight to begin with. Once you request the crime stat or crime grid, and I'll use grid from now on, but once you request the crime grid, what you are looking for are substantially similar crimes. Substantially similar crimes. They say you have to say things 3 times for anybody to remember them. I'm going to give you a bonus one here. Substantially similar crimes are so important because you have to show that the landlord or occupier, apartment complex, knew about prior crime or prior behavior, dangerous activity, let's call it, that would have put them on notice, made it foreseeable that what happened to your client would happen. For example, if you get a crime grid back and there are no violent crimes, the worst crime is a car stolen from the parking lot, and your person has been shot 5 times, you might have a summary judgment problem there because your prior crimes are not substantially similar to what happened to your client. And my dog is eating something. Hold on, I'll show you. He's down there eating something. Bunker. Come on, man. So that's one time. Sorry about that, y'all. So you need to make sure that your substantially similar crimes, and if y'all hear that, that is him. we're gonna have a bonus. We're gonna have a bonus person in this CLE. Come here. You can be on the camera too. You can be on the camera too. So when Bunker, for example, is eating that thing over there, no joke, when he's eating that thing, I know that he's probably going to do that in other rooms because he likes to eat the doorstops. Now, if I leave him alone in my bedroom and he starts eating my blanket, I would tell you I didn't know he would do that because I've never seen him eat my blanket before. That is the same exact idea as what we're talking about in these negligent security cases. You need to have something that's substantially similar to what happened to your client. Now, I'm not going to go through, I can't in this time period, go through with y'all all the cases that give exceptions or explain that rule more fully. The Matz versus Days In case is one that's pretty important. And essentially what this whole line of cases says is that the crime doesn't have to be exact. You don't have to have a shooting in the same area at the same time and so on. But you do need to have that substantially similar crime. So when you're doing your intake, be logical, be reasonable. If there's a ton of drug activity, we all kind of know, I think, that drug activity, repeated drug activity, will lead to violent crimes. You know, drug areas typically lead to violence. So if you see a ton of drugs, then I get eaten, then you might have a case. So you want to be reasonable and use your common sense, because that's ultimately what the jury is going to do. I see in the comments that Bunker is living his best life. Bunker is really cool during the day. Bunker is a terrorist at nighttime, though, so far. So that's what these bags under my eyes are, everybody.
I want you to know I'm going to use Bunker in my dog bite case presentation later. Bunker's coming back. I'm going to need to borrow one.
Somebody barked at Bunker for the first time. He's 4 months old. Somebody barked at him yesterday as he goes back to the door thing. And he was just confused. He didn't even know what to do. So I don't think he's going to be the vicious dog who is biting people. Hopefully.
They never are at first. They never are at first.
Hey, come here. You're in trouble. All right. So we've talked about the crime grid. Once you get the crime grid, your next step is going to be looking at the crime grid and trying to identify what those substantially similar crimes are. And I want you to be pretty broad here. You might see aggravated assault, and if it's a shooting case you're working on, you probably got a pretty good chance. You want to look for any kind of violent crime. You want to look for any report that doesn't even tell you what it is, you know, an unknown or a dispatch call. You want to look for property damage. The reason you want to look for property damage is because you're ultimately going to have to prove that the apartment complex knew about these prior crimes. So unfortunately in Georgia, at least for the most part, the landlord can bury his head in the sand and say, I don't know anything about that. Never heard of it. I'm in New York. Nope. That's why you want to try your best to have apartment complexes that have management on staff, because they do know. And that representative of the owner, manager, whoever, they're going to be the person that gives you notice of those prior crimes. So you want to have a very broad request for all these police reports. And I'll tell you, we did one the other day. We ended up paying $3,000 for police reports just to get them, to see what the heck's going on. So we get the grid. Usually the grid's like $4. I mean, it's nothing. Maybe you have to pay time depending on the police force. But then you're going to need to get sometimes, mostly hundreds, sometimes thousands of pages of records of police reports to figure out what's been going on there. When you read those police reports, what you're looking for is, are these crimes substantially similar? And you're also looking for, do these police reports or anything show that the apartment complex knew about the crime? You want to look in the victim section and see who that person that's listed as a victim is. Sometimes it's listed as the apartment manager or the apartment complex itself. You want to read the narrative, the description, and you want to see, you know, there was a shooting. After investigating the shooting at apartment E4, I then went to the leasing office and told the leasing office that blah, blah, blah. There, you just got substantially similar crime, hopefully, that the apartment complex has prior notice on. The reason I mentioned property damage crimes is because let's imagine there's a door that's been kicked in. And you read the police report and it's, you know, an attempted robbery. Well, that could be good for your case. You know, that's good. That's a potentially violent crime. And let's say something similar-ish happened to your client. Well, property damage crimes will be really helpful because you'll be able to ask the apartment complex, hey, who fixed that door? Who fixed the door? When they tell you they don't know about the crime and do it in this order, you ask the apartment complex in a deposition, you say, hey, do you know about this crime? They go, no, never heard of it. Then you say, well, who fixed this door? Then they go, oh, yeah, I guess we did. And then you say, let me look at your property, your maintenance records. And then if you see it, you have confirmation. If you don't, then you say, hey, you have pretty crappy property records. Your maintenance records stink. So that's one way to do it. With the crime grid, that probably is a 3-month process to get the grid, go through the reports, review the reports, and then start calling prior victims. You want to call the person who got shot 6 months ago and say, hey, I'm so sorry you got shot. Same thing happened to my client 6 months later. Would you mind being a witness for us? Would you mind telling me your story? Hey, after you got shot, you told the apartment complex, right? They knew. And then you're building your case step by step. These cases, I mentioned the resources and how much time and effort it takes. I hope you're kind of seeing that. I mean, this is step one, is getting the police reports. And that is a huge time investment, because it's not a case about one shooting. It's a case about all of the prior crime that's gone on before your shooting. You want it to be a crescendo in that it's crime, 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 crime. And then the natural result is, well, yeah, that's what happened to my client. They got shot. And there's the drop off. So you want to build this whole case based on things that happened months, years ago. So you end up investigating. I mean, we investigate sometimes hundreds, at least tens of crimes other than our case. So imagine, you're taking one car accident, but you really got to investigate 50 of them. And that's kind of what this is. And I'll tell you, it's a little more difficult, I think, than cars. So that's the police side of things. To recap, you're getting the crime grid. You're looking at what kind of crimes are listed. You're going to get the crime code and the date, most likely. You are then going to request those ones that you think are substantially similar to by the police. You're going to request them from the police. And then you're going to review those reports, see what records, what crimes appear to be substantially similar, reach out to the prior victims. And you may also want to reach out to the police officers. As you see Officer Jones on 30 of these reports that you're looking at, Officer Jones is probably a pretty good witness. So you want to get Officer Jones on your team, say, hey, Officer Jones, what's been going on? Have you talked to the property manager about all this crime? And most likely he has. So that's what you're doing on the police report side. On the internet side, Google the crap out of everybody. You want to look at Google reviews, apartmentcomplex.com reviews, anything that would put the apartment complex or give the apartment complex notice of bad stuff going on. If you name an apartment complex at this point, literally in Atlanta, at least, I can tell you pretty much what the Google reviews say about every one of those places. And you eventually want the apartment complex to say, yeah, those reviews are important to us. We review them. And we know that, what's going on based somewhat on those. So you also want to look up news articles. You want to look up shootings, crimes that happened at those apartment complexes. And let me back up 1 second. One last note on the crime grid. I remember I told you have to request a specific address. Depending on the apartment complex, you may have to request many, many, many addresses. For example, if you need a crime report from a place in Sierra Townhomes down on Godby Road, all you need to do is request the main number or the main address, and College Park Police will give you a crime grid. And if you need one from there, let me know. I have lots of them. On the other hand, if you're at a place called Sierra Contour, which is out in DeKalb County, each building has a separate address and the police treat them separately. So there's like 20 something buildings out there, and you have to request a different address. You have to make the request for different addresses for every single building. So if you get a crime grid back and you look at it and you say that doesn't make sense, it's not the best neighborhood, there's got to be more crime, check the addresses with your crime grids. So you've got the crime grids on the police side and the police reports. You've got the internet search you're going to run. And then the third thing I think you need to do is put your boots on the ground. I mentioned Matt and private investigators and what he mentioned. My hesitation on private investigators is because in what I need them for in these negligent security cases is I need them to go find prior victims and witnesses. And I want to be, or at least somebody from my office that I really trust. I want us to be the first people to reach out to these victims. The whole idea that your first impression matters. I want to be the face, or somebody in office. We need to be the face to all of these prior victims so they know they can trust us, so they know that they can rely on us and be honest with us. So I want to hear the story myself. I want to be the one to make a decision about whether it's somebody I believe or not. But I kid you not, we are going door to door. If we get a shooting case in on a Monday, and let's imagine I know the apartment complex, I know the area, I feel pretty comfortable about the prior crime, even without the crime grid, I'm going down to the apartment complex that day. And I see Chris Stewart logging in right here. I put my phone to my ear. I'm walking in on my, throughout the apartment complex, and I'm trying to talk to everybody. So that's what I'm doing. I'm knocking on doors. I'm yelling, hey, anybody know anything? I mean, I'm doing whatever I can. And then usually I'm getting asked very nicely to leave by the apartment complex manager. And that's fine. That's fine. Now note, if your client is a tenant, your client has every right to ask you to join, to come down there. So if you do get asked to leave and your client is a tenant, you can nicely say, I'm sorry, I've been asked to be here by one of your residents, but in the end, you're probably going to leave anyway. That last point is something also I want to mention to you. And forgive me, I skipped over this. Hey, Bunker, we got company. Come on. That last point about you being an invitee as you walk around to these apartment complexes, that's an important point because your client pretty much needs to be an invitee. Forgive me again, but you need to, hey. All right, we're back to the puppy gate. All right, so an invitee is someone who has a legal right, a legal authority to be where they want to be. So when I go to the mall is inviting me there, and I have every reason to be there, and I'm completely allowed to be there and do whatever I want within that scope of the invitee status. If your client is not an invitee, don't take the case. I made the mistake once I thought he was an invitee, and I'm pretty sure he still was, but at trial, the judge said that my client was a licensee. Luckily, it worked out in the end. We got a really good verdict. But looking back, I'm not taking any cases where my client is not an invitee. So to prove your client is one, you need to know who invited them there. If they're a tenant, you're good. If they are visiting a friend, you need to get on the horn and get that friend's information and get that friend to say, yeah, I invited whoever here. I get this call a lot. Hey, I was shot at this apartment complex, blah, 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 blah. Okay, why were you there? Well, I was visiting my friend. What's your friend's name? Steve. Steve who? Who's your friend Steve? Yeah, just some guy I know named Steve. Okay, well, where does Steve live? Yeah, at that apartment complex, I don't know. How long have you known Steve for? A year? Okay, so you got a friend. His name is Steve. What's his number? I don't know. My concern is I'm not going to be able to prove, if I can speak, I'm not going to be able to prove that my guy is an invitee unless I can get a hold of Steve and prove that Steve actually said, yeah, come here to my apartment. In those cases, your client is either a licensee, which has a lower duty. The landlord owes a lower duty to anyone who's not an invitee, or your client could be a trespasser. And if your client's a trespasser, pretty much the landlord only just needs to not maliciously hurt your client. So if your client has not been invited to the property by someone, in that case, don't take it. Don't take it. Don't waste your time. So I'll kind of amend what I said earlier. Step one, start with the damages on your intake. Step two, figure out what the heck they were doing at that apartment complex and how are you going to prove that your client was an invitee. And then three, start doing the legwork of, is your client, why was your client shot? Were there prior crimes? Are they substantially similar? Now, the last thing that I haven't really talked about here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, is how you prove about this idea of reasonable security measures. My truthful, not BS answer is, unless you're in federal court, don't go hire an expert. You need one there just because of disclosure things and you want to be careful. But otherwise, use your common sense. Use your common sense. Cameras don't generally prevent crimes if they're hidden because people don't see the cameras and then they assume they're going to get away with the crime. When you go into Target and you wave when you walk in and they have that big screen that shows you're on camera, what they're telling you is don't steal shit. You're on camera, don't steal stuff. So an apartment complex who has cameras also needs notice to the tenants that you're on camera, you're being recorded. The apartment complex needs signs saying that we're monitoring the cameras. Gates generally don't really keep people out. People are going to get into an apartment complex even if there's a gate. What a gate really does is it prevents you from getting out, And that way, hopefully it's a crime deterrence because once you commit the crime, you can't get away so fast. Security guards, great. Depending on their post orders, that's the orders that they're given of what they're supposed to do or not supposed to do. If I go hire a security guard at my office building, but don't tell him what to do, well, that could be a problem. So you want to get post orders as best you can. Big takeaway here is start with damages. Make sure that you have substantial damages because hopefully the thing that you're walking away with this right now is it's a ton of work. It's a ton of work, these cases. So you need to have something at the end that you're going to want, which the only thing we can get is money. So you need damages that support a large recovery at the end to justify this work. Use all of your resources, police, witnesses, internet, use all that during your investigative phase. But in the end, use your common sense on these cases. If you sit up at night and say, if I was a juror, I wouldn't find from my client, I would find the other person at fault, then you got a problem. Mike Roth, I see you popping on to tell me I don't have time. I'm going to say one last thing, the very last thing, and that's apportionment. The biggest challenge in these cases is that at the end of the trial, the jury is going to be able to apportion fault to multiple people. Probably the apartment complex, probably the shooter in a shooting case, and maybe your client. So you are always going to have a problem in these cases, no matter what, that the jury could say, yes, I believe everything you say, Mike. I believe there was prior substantially similar crime. I believe that the apartment complex could have done more. You tried the best case in the entire world. I want to hire you next case. But I think the guy who pulled the trigger is the one who's at fault. So I'm going to assign him 100% responsibility and you get 0. That can happen with these cases. So that is the biggest challenge. And with respect to people who do high level med mal cases, which I give those people a lot of credit and not something I can do. I think these cases are harder because of that, because you can do the best job in the world and the jury can still say, hey, it was the shooter's fault. So with that, I don't mean to scare you all in these cases. They are difficult, but the parting word I will give you is after these cases, I will drive by some apartment complexes and I will see gates that work. I will see security guards. I will see stuff that really makes me happy. I mean, it means I made a difference there, I think, because the way to change apartment complexes and businesses is to make them pay money. That's why planes aren't falling out of the sky anymore. And every older lawyer is an aviation expert. So anyway, Mike, thanks for having me. I appreciate y'all.